I am a layman, and so I'm going to try not to speak past my understanding as best as I can, but I think I know enough where I can help people who don't know the issues see to keep certain things in mind so they don't get confused by people who have particular motivations on manipulating the text into saying something it doesn't say. So I'm going to do my best just to try to bring people up to understand what I can see that often confuses people. So that's my disclaimer. I'm not an expert and I don't have it all figured out, but there's certain things I know that I notice people don't understand that is helpful in being deceived on certain things people claim. Okay. So let me show this. I think this should help kind of illustrate my point. Okay, so we know in the Bible, and it's the same in English and same in the Hebrew originally. We know this. There's no dispute here on this, what I'm saying here at all. I'll try to mention when I think people would dispute it. Some people might dispute it, to be fair. Okay, so we know a day means in Hebrew and English, probably other languages too. A day is a 24-hour period that delineates it from the day before and the day after. In kind of our modern or a Roman way of looking at it, we call, Saturday is midnight on Friday night, turns to the next day, the next 24-hour period. That's its own day, which is, in the Bible, it's evening and morning. A cycle of day and night is a 24-hour period. That's a day, right? We use the term day to also speak of the light portion of the day, which is not really 12 hours of the day, but depending on the season, there's more or less hours of daylight. We can call the daylight portion of a 24-hour period. That can be referenced regarding the day, meaning the part where there's light, right? That's true in all. So a day can mean the day portion or the 24-hour period. And where that gets complicated is that the delineation between one 24-hour period to the next in the Hebrew concept is from sundown to sundown, even to even, right? So look at this chart, which I made to talk about Jesus, like what day Jesus died and rose on. So just ignore that, but the Sabbath thing helps here. But this other part's just kind of saying what it seems like the text is going over. But I just want to kind of show. So this middle section is the 24-hour cycle, day and night, right? Showing that. And then the next thing is the next day, right? According to the Bible. So you see on the bottom, the biblical week, sundown to sundown. See the night's portion to the next night portion. Then that would be the next 24-hour period. The Sabbath is a 24-hour period that starts at sundown and ends at sundown. But notice how that 24-hour period called the Sabbath, and the Hebrew concept at the bottom where my arrow is, what we call, so we say, well, the Sabbath is Saturday. And that's not wrong, right? But it starts on Friday sundown when the sun goes down. That's the beginning of the 24-hour period called the Sabbath. And the day called Saturday on the Roman week is still happening once the 24-hour period called the Sabbath, according to the Bible, is over. So part of Saturday isn't the Sabbath, and part of Friday is the Sabbath, right? Because on the Roman week, we go midnight to midnight. So we have part of the Sabbath being on Friday night and part of Saturday night being part of the 24-hour period of the day after the Sabbath. See why I say it that way? Because it's not that the day that starts at midnight on Saturday night is Sunday, the day after Saturday, but it was already the day after the Sabbath during what we call Saturday, the 24-hour period called Saturday. Part of that, namely when the sun goes down, is no longer part of the Sabbath. It's now the 24-hour period, which is a day, which is the day after the Sabbath. So part of our Saturday is really the beginning part of the day, meaning 24-hour period, which is after the Sabbath day ends. Sabbath meaning the 24-hour part, or the 24-hour day, which is the Sabbath day, right? So part of our Saturday, the 24-hour period called Saturday, is part of the 24-hour period called the day after the Sabbath, but it's still technically on the day called Saturday in a Roman week. Just listen to that again until you get what I'm saying. This is a visual representation of that. Everything blue here is the Sabbath day. The 24-hour period of the day that's called the Sabbath extends into Friday on a Roman calendar or our modern calendar or our modern week, days and weeks. And part of Saturday is not technically Sabbath anymore, because the day called the Sabbath, which is 24-hour periods, and differentiates it from the preparation day or the day before the Sabbath, and differentiates it from the first day of the week, that is the 24-hour period after the 24-hour period called the Sabbath ends. See what I'm saying? So on the biblical week, the preparation day is the 24-hour period before the Sabbath. Then we have 24 hours that is the Sabbath, approximately 24 hours, right? And then when the Sabbath ends, it's the next 24-hour period, which is the day after the Sabbath or the first day after the Sabbath. So that's what it looks like. Evening, morning, this is our modern week. So when we say Saturday is the Sabbath, this is what we mean, right? So Jesus resurrected probably right before the sun came up on the first day of the week. So, because it says the sun was rising and he was already gone, right? So people will say, see, he rose on Saturday. No. He would have had to have risen during the daylight portion of the day we call Saturday. Right? Because Jesus may have rose on what we call Saturday today and still not have risen on the Sabbath. Because part of Saturday night, even on our modern calendar, is still the day after the Sabbath. So Jesus could have rose on Saturday, and still it's true that he rose on the day after the Sabbath. You get what I'm saying? It doesn't actually say what part before the daylight on the first day of the week that he rose. It just seems to indicate that it sounds like he rose right. Some people say he rose as the sun came up. It doesn't say that. It says the sun was coming up and the tomb was empty. So he obviously rose some point right prior to the sun coming up. And the sun coming up is not when the next day after the Sabbath begins. The day after the Sabbath begins when the sun goes down on Saturday. So the only way Jesus rose on Sabbath is if he rose before the sun went down on Sabbath, on that, which would be a Saturday on our week. But so think about it. He could have rose on Saturday after the sun went down on the Sabbath. Like early, like if he rose during after the sun went down on Sabbath, he rose on the day after the Sabbath. But it still may not be called, you might not think of it as Sunday. See, that's what's so weird about this. Even if Jesus rose on Saturday, part of Saturday isn't the Sabbath. So he would have had to rise before any of the night portion. But then so the text doesn't say he rose after the sun came up on the first day. It says he was already risen. Just to be clear on that. But he could technically have risen on the day we call Saturday today, midnight to midnight, and it would not be on Sabbath that he rose. He would have had to rise from the dead before the sun went down on Saturday, because that's when the Sabbath ends. So it could be true that he technically didn't raise on Sunday. Okay, think about this. It's not clear, so I'm not arguing for any view here. I'm not arguing for any particular. I believe he rose on the day after the Sabbath. Which means the Sabbath day had ended and he was resting in the tomb, meaning dead. And he didn't come back to life until the day of the Sabbath, the 24-hour period of the Sabbath had ended. Then we were into the next day, which starts at sundown on Saturday, and he rose then. That's my position. But I'm not arguing for position when I say this. I'm just saying this. Jesus could have risen on Saturday, as we think about days today, and it still would be true that Jesus didn't resurrect on the Sabbath day. If you understand that, then you have a good grasp of what the issues are here. Even if Jesus rose on Saturday, it's still true that it could be true that he didn't rise from the dead on the Sabbath day. And a lot of different texts come into bear on this. Because our Sunday isn't precisely the day after the Sabbath as it is biblically. The question is, did Jesus rise on Saturday or the day after Saturday? I mean, I should say, did Jesus rise on the Sabbath or did he rise on the day after the Sabbath? And the problem with saying he rose on the Sabbath is like, if he had risen on the daylight portion of Saturday, what we call Saturday, which is what would be required for him to be said to have risen on Sabbath, on the Sabbath day, during the Sabbath day, that's true. How would the whole entire early church not have understood him to rise on that day? Everyone says he rose on Sunday. There's no one arguing or advocating that actually, no, he really rose on Sabbath. No, he rose on the day after the Sabbath, which we call Sunday today. It's kind of like lost in translation, if you will, in culture. But to say he rose on Sabbath there's no dissent in the early church is like a conspiracy theory just on the surface. What that would require, how would that be lost that he rose on Sunday? How would everyone think he rose on Sunday, but he really rose on the Sabbath day? For that to be true, he would have had to rise during the daylight portion of what we call Saturday. And how would they get that wrong? There's just no way. Unless no one believed anything about Jesus until it was written in the Bible, and then they just kind of misread the Bible and what Sabbaths are, and they misunderstood how there's these festivals, Sabbaths based on the Hebrew calendar. And then everybody came to believe he rose on Sunday because of a misreading of the Bible, which they didn't have right away. No, what's written in the Bible comes from a tradition that was existing because of actual history. The idea that could be lost what day he actually rose is like saying we could lose the days of the week. It's impossible because everybody's operating on that cycle and people are separated. If somebody got off on their counting of days in the weekly cycle, everyone else would bring them back into sync with the actual weekly cycle. You don't lose days of the week. You can mess up the calendar because it's based on dating things and sightings of the moon, but you can't lose the weekly cycle because everybody's operating, or the vast majority of the earth is operating on it. So if any group somehow lost what the next day was, everyone else would get them back on track. It's something that it's not feasible. And likewise, it's not feasible to think everyone without dissent believes he rose on Saturday, but your reading of the text, because of your wanting to emphasize certain things, because of your preconceived beliefs about the festivals coming into the new covenant, is just that, wishful thinking. The feasibility of them losing the day Jesus rose on is outrageous. And if you don't realize it, you don't have a grasp of what the text is saying and how calendars and time actually work in real history. I mean, no offense. I'm just being real with you. I'm just being frank. If Jesus rose on Saturday, it would undermine the idea of Sunday being a new Sabbath right from the get-go, and we could all just go home and say, yep, there's no basis for Jesus raising or for keeping Sunday, because Jesus didn't even rise on Sunday. He rose on the Sabbath day. But that's just not true. And the person who really started that was Armstrong, and he's been discredited. And he was conspiratorial, and he was running with bad scholarship that on the surface looks like it makes sense. And then we want that to be true because it helps our view, and we run with it, and we call people liars who we shouldn't be calling liars, and we're not being careful Bible students. And shame on us when we do that, because it's not caring about the truth, it's caring about being right.